I had a friend reach out to me who I haven't seen in almost a decade. He said he had an edger that needed some attention. I told him that I'd be glad to take a look at it. Now, I don't remember if he told me what the problem was, but it turns out he couldn't get it started. The only issue was that he was over an hour and a half away from me, and that means this will be the longest distance I've ever driven to pick something up. What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by. Today's project is this Troybilt 4-cycle edger, and the problem is that the owner couldn't get it started. Now I was finally able to get it started, but it wasn't easy, so it might be a fuel issue or something else that's causing it to have a hard time starting, but I don't want to look at the carb just yet. Instead, I want to look somewhere else first. Now, I'm going to try and repair this edger, however, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these other options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. Now, one of the best features on this engine is it has the ability to use an external electric starter, either using a handheld starter or using a special adapter you can put on a drill you already have. When I finally got this thing started, I was only using the rope, but I did check that the electric start option still works. The other thing that's important to pay attention to are the instructions on how to start the engine, which might be different from other edgers. I know that sounds a bit obvious, but sometimes even I forget how to start a certain engine, mainly because I don't use it very often, which would apply to most edgers as you don't use them very often, only a couple times a year. Now, the first thing I want to do is to show you the problem. Now, it did come with gasoline in the tank, but I've already replaced it with my own that I recently got from the gas station. Now, the gasoline I got does not have any ethanol in it. It's 89 octane. It's also been stabilized for long-term storage. All we have to do is follow the starting instructions and see how well it starts. On our first attempt, it did try and start, but it didn't stay running, so we'll have to give it another try. So on the third attempt, we finally got it started, but it took a total of 16 pulls to do it though. To be honest, that's just too many pulls, and I think most people would have given up before then. And if you do get it started and use it for a bit and stop the engine, it's really hard to get it restarted when it's hot, so you can see why we need to do something about this. Since this is a small 4-cycle engine, most people forget that there's more maintenance involved than a normal 2-cycle edger. According to the owner's manual, after 10 hours of operation, it recommends a valve lash inspection and adjustment. The valve lash is the clearance between the rocker arm and the top of the valve stem. That means we'll need to get to the rocker arms, which are located under the valve cover. If the clearance is off, it can cause the engine to be hard to start, run poorly, or not run at all. The first thing we need to do is to remove the rear engine cover. Just be careful because some of the screws will be fine thread while the others will be coarse thread, so don't get them mixed up. The last screw is kind of hard to get to. To make it easier, you can remove the left wheel if you want to. After the cover is gone, we can then remove the single bolt that holds the valve cover to the top of the engine, disconnect the spark plug wire, and then gently pry on the edges of the valve cover so we can remove it. So here are both of the rocker arms, and the first thing I need to do is remove the spark plug so I can put the piston at the top of its travel, preferably on the compression stroke. Now after removing the plug, we can see it's extremely dirty with carbon, which means the filter might be very dirty, causing less air to flow through the engine. We'll take care of this later on. Looking at the engine from behind, the left rocker arm is for the intake and allows air and fuel from the carb to get inside the engine. That would mean the rocker arm on the right is for the exhaust valve. The next thing we need to do is to turn the engine so the piston is at the top of its travel, and for this I'm going to use the electric starter shaft to turn it. If you don't have one of these, you can slowly pull on the rope to rotate the engine. As the engine rotates, you can see how the rocker arms move. To see where the piston is at, I'm going to use a small screwdriver to rest against it so I can tell when the piston is moving up or down. I want to put the piston on the compression stroke, and that happens once the intake rocker arm moves down and back up, and then when the piston is at the highest point inside the cylinder. You might have to rotate the engine back and forth to get the piston exactly at the top. Once the piston is at the top, both rocker arms should be somewhat loose, which ours are. The next thing we need to do is to measure what the clearance is between the rocker arms and the valves. To do that, I'm going to use a feeler gauge set. It's basically a collection of feeler gauges of different thicknesses. We'll then slide them between the rocker arm and the top of the valves and find one that fits and isn't too loose. We want to have a little bit of drag when moving it around in between the arm and the top of the valve as well. The first one I want to try is a 4/1000 of an inch feeler gauge on the intake. If it slides in, it means the clearance here is either 4/1000 of an inch or bigger, but if it doesn't fit, it means the clearance here is smaller than that size. And as you can see, it slides right in and is rather loose, which means the clearance here is definitely larger than 4/1000 of an inch. If we do the same procedure on the exhaust rocker arm, it too slides between them and is also loose as well, which means the clearance here is also larger than 4/1000 of an inch. That means I'm going to increase the size of the feeler gauge, but to save time, I'm going to jump to the 6/1000 of an inch and see how it fits. So it does slide in, but there's a little bit more drag on it as I move it around, which means we're getting close to finding out what the clearance is for the intake valve. Now moving over to the exhaust side, it slides in as well, but I don't feel the same drag like I did for the intake, and it's still very loose. That means we need to keep increasing the size until we find one that has a lot more drag on it. The next size I'll be using is the 8/1000 of an inch feeler. Now when I slide it under the intake rocker arm, it just barely fits, and I can also feel that there's a lot of drag on it. From the amount of drag on it, I think it's safe to say that the clearance here on the intake side is 8/1000 of an inch, so I'm not going to continue measuring this side. However, we need to keep going on the exhaust side. If we check the exhaust side, it does slide in, and there's some drag on it, but it's still pretty loose, so I think we need to keep increasing the size to the next step. The next size I'll be using will be the 10/1000 of an inch feeler, and as you can see, it does slide under the rocker, but this time there's a lot of drag on it. You can see just how much drag there is because the edger is moving around the table as I slide it around. I think it's safe to say that the clearance for the exhaust side is 10/1000 of an inch. According to the manual, the clearance is supposed to be 3 to 6/1000 of an inch, and what that means is that both of ours are out of tolerance and need to be adjusted. Now they aren't that far out, but it's enough to cause some issues like difficulty starting. To make things easier, I'm going to use the 5/1000 of an inch feeler gauge, but it's up to you if you want to pick a different number that's still in tolerance. What I'm going to do is slide the feeler gauge under the rocker arm and then slowly turn the nut on the rocker arm until I feel there's some resistance while sliding the feeler around. Now take your time, but this shouldn't take that much time at all. Once I'm satisfied with the intake side, I'll do the same for the exhaust side. While I was tightening the exhaust side, I made it a little bit too tight and the feeler got stuck. That's not a problem. Just turn the bolt the other way slowly, get the feeler loose again, and then start the process over. Once I'm satisfied that they are where they're supposed to be, we can then move on to cleaning the spark plug. Now to clean the plugs, I like to burn the excess carbon off the tip of the plug with a torch, but you can use other methods. I've been told that using carb cleaner and a wire brush works fine as well. The other option is to just replace the plug, but I don't like doing that unless I know the plug is bad. Once the carbon is a light gray color, I'll then use a wire brush with steel bristles to remove what's left of the carbon. Now it doesn't look brand new, but my main goal was to only remove as much carbon as I could, which should make it work a little bit better, and if it doesn't, I'll replace it. At this point, we're now ready to put everything back together on the engine so we can see if it starts a whole lot easier. Now I know there will be people out there who would have recommended on replacing the spark plug as part of a tune-up, and they are correct. A tune-up might have improved things, but since I know the valve lash inspection hasn't been done, I thought it'd be better to start there. Then if that doesn't work, we'll then perform a tune-up. Just as a reminder, the last time it took 3 attempts with a total of 16 pulls to get it started. I didn't show you the hot start, but it took several pulls as well to get it started. So on the first attempt, it started on the 5th pull, which is pretty good when compared to the other attempts before the valve lash adjustment. Like I said, these little 4-cycle engines are very convenient because you don't have to mix oil and gasoline, but they have more maintenance to do, which offsets a lot of their convenience. In the raw footage, I let the edger run for about 2 minutes, and it's not what I would call hot, but it's definitely not a cold engine at the moment. So what I want to do is to start the engine, let it run for a bit, then stop it and see how it handles a hot start. So after letting it run for a while, it seems like the clutch is making some interesting noises, but it's working fine at the moment, so we'll take a look at it some other time. Right now, I want to restart the engine and see how difficult it is. So it looks like it's starting a lot better now when it's hot or cold, which should make my friend very happy, just so long as they follow the instructions, of course. I don't have a problem with this style of 4-cycle engine, mainly because I think it reminds me of a little scooter or a kid's ATV, but the maintenance might scare most people away, that is, if they were even aware of it, which I hate to say, most aren't. So another option as to why this edger was so difficult to start could be a dirty air filter. It might not be allowing enough air to go through the carb to bring enough fuel into the engine. As a test, try removing the dirty air filter and see if it makes any difference. If it does, then try cleaning it or replace the filter. So my question is, if you didn't have one of these small 4-cycle engines, would you consider buying one knowing that there's more maintenance involved than the 2-cycle version? Personally, I wouldn't have a problem buying one because I know what's involved, but I'd still prefer less maintenance and would probably buy the 2-cycle version. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.